Welcome to the Sleep Hours, the only place where cartoons fall asleep before you do. So grab your blanket, tuck in your favorite plushie, and let's get weird. There are stories that speak in words, and there are those that whisper through silence. Some are remembered for battles, others for peace. But tonight's story is different. It belongs to the quiet in between. They say that when a warrior's sword grows tired of war, it begins to sing to the wind instead. Each note, a memory, each silence, a truth. And somewhere beneath a sky of fading stars, a lone wanderer walks once more. Can you guess who he is before the first sound fades? A man who once fought shadows, but now seeks only stillness. This is Samurai Jack, the Quiet Blade. The wind carried no sound that night, no whisper of insects, no call of the wind through the grass. Only the faint crunch of Jack's sandals pressed against the dry road beneath him. The moon was full and pale, painting the hills in silver, and his shadow stretched long and thin across the ground. He had been walking for days without speaking, not because there was no one to talk to, but because silence had become his only companion. The world was changing around him. Even the air seemed heavier now. Every step he took felt like walking through a memory. Far ahead, a faint glow flickered on the horizon, a village quiet and small. He hadn't seen firelight in many nights. His body ached, but his spirit remained still. He followed the light until the outline of small houses rose before him. Roofs bowed under age and wind. Jack stepped into the empty street, his hand resting gently on the hilt of his sword, not in fear and habit. The sound of his own breathing filled the space between buildings. The village was silent. Doors were open, candles burned low, yet not a single soul stirred. He paused beside a small shrine. A wooden plaque hung crookedly on its frame. The writing was faded, but he traced the characters softly with his fingers. Rest brings strength. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. He had heard that teaching long ago from his father. A samurai must not only know when to fight, but when to stop. He moved deeper into the village, his steps slow, measured. A wind chime swayed overhead, yet no breeze moved it. The stillness was strange, not dangerous, not hostile, just asleep. He passed a well, its water black and glassy. It reflected the moon perfectly. He leaned closer and saw his own reflection, weary eyes, a line of dust across his face. The faint tremor of exhaustion he had ignored for too long. The sword at his side shimmered under the moonlight. It was quiet, too. No hum of energy. No faint vibration of magic. For the first time in years, it felt like a simple blade, not a weapon of destiny, but steel and silence. Jack sat at the edge of the well. He placed the sword beside him and took a deep breath. The night pressed in softly, wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. A sound drifted through the quiet, faint and melodic, like a flute played from very far away. Jack turned his head. At the end of the road stood a small house, light flickering through its paper walls. The music called again, gentle as the tide. He rose, lifting his sword only to carry it respectfully. The closer he came, the clearer the melody grew, slow, mournful, yet somehow peaceful. Inside, a single lantern burned. An old man sat cross-legged near the wall, a flute resting in his lap. His eyes were closed, his face calm. Jack bowed slightly, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. "Forgive my intrusion," he said. "I did not mean to disturb your rest." The man opened his eyes. They were pale and clouded blind, yet seeing in another way. "You have not disturbed me, traveler," the man said softly. "This place has been waiting for you." Jack hesitated. "Waiting for me?" The old man smiled faintly. "For a soul that carries too much noise." Jack felt something shift inside him. He looked down at his sword again, the quiet blade gleaming faintly. The old man motioned toward the empty mat beside him. "Sit," he said. "The night is long, but it can teach you silence." Jack bowed and sat. Outside, the wind began to move again, whispering through the eaves. For the first time in a long time, he did not feel the need to move, or to plan, or to fight. He only listened. The old man's hut was simple, built from wood darkened by years of wind and smoke. A single scroll hung on the far wall, painted with one word, Moo Emptiness. Jack sat with his legs crossed, hands resting on his knees. The air smelled of ash and rice straw. The old man lifted the flute again and played just one note, long, low, steady. It filled the room without echo, the sound wrapping around them like a blanket. "When the world was young," the old man said, "swords sang. Their song was power, and power turned to war. But every blade that sang too loudly broke." Jack listened quietly. "The strongest sword," the man continued, "is not the one that shouts. It is the one that learns to be still. Do you understand?" Jack looked down at his weapon, its edge gleaming like frozen moonlight. He thought of all the times it had cut through darkness, through monsters, through the endless path that never seemed to end. It had always been sharp, always ready. But it had never been quiet. "Ah, I believe I do," Jack said softly. The man smiled, though his eyes remained distant. "Then rest. A warrior who cannot rest will turn his blade inward one day." And Jack's gaze lingered on the flame of the lantern beside him. It flickered gently, breathing in rhythm with his thoughts. For the first time in what felt like years, he set his sword aside, completely aside. He closed his eyes. The world outside fell away. He could hear the crickets return, timidly at first, then steady. The village began to breathe again. Wind chimes stirred, water rippled in the well. Life whispered back into the air, as if the land itself had been waiting for him to stop moving. When Jack opened his eyes, the old man was gone. Only the flute lay on the mat, beside a cup of tea still steaming. He looked around, startled. The door remained open, moonlight spilling in. Outside, the street glowed faintly. Lanterns that had burned out hours ago now flickered again. He stepped into the road, with the flute still in his hand. The world felt different, lighter, softer, like a dream that remembered itself. A soft breeze brushed past him, carrying a voice so faint it could have been imagination. "Listen to the silence, samurai. The quiet blade cuts deepest." He turned, but no one stood there. Only the empty street, the rustle of leaves, and his sword resting against the doorframe behind him. Jack took a slow breath. He felt something he hadn't felt since his youth. Calm. Not victory, not relief, just calm. He knelt by the well once more. His reflection looked back at him, softer now, less burdened. He dipped his hand into the cool water, ripples spreading outward like small sighs. For a long while he stayed that way, not a warrior, not a wanderer, just a man in silence. Then, in the distance, a sound broke the peace, faint, sharp, almost like steel drawn against stone. Jack rose slowly, instinct flickering in his chest again. But this time he didn't rush. He picked up his sword with both hands, holding it not as a weapon, but as an old friend. The edge reflected the moon, the still village behind him, and the calm now written across his face. "The quiet blade," he whispered, "but still a blade." He turned toward the sound. It came again, not violent, not urgent, more like someone calling to him. Perhaps a traveler, perhaps fate. He walked toward it, the flute tied to his belt, and the silence following him like a companion. Somewhere in the trees beyond the hill, a single lantern glowed, swaying in rhythm with the wind, and the night deepened, warm and endless. The soft ringing grew clearer, as Jack followed the narrow path leading out of the village. The moon hung low now, touching the tops of the trees with silver. Between the leaves, the sound came and went, a faint clang, slow and deliberate, like metal meeting metal in rhythm. At the edge of the forest stood a small forge, half buried under ivy. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, but inside faint embers still glowed. Jack stepped carefully toward the open doorway. The forge was empty except for a single hammer resting beside an unfinished blade. The sword on the anvil gleamed faintly, though no hand worked it. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed. "Who tends this fire?" The air shifted, and from the shadows a shape emerged. Not a man, not quite spirit, but something between. A blacksmith draped in smoke, his eyes glowing faintly beneath the ash of years. "I once forged the blades of kings," the spirit said, his voice low and deep. "But now I forge silence." Jack's brow furrowed. "Silent?" The spirit nodded. "Every warrior who walks this land leaves behind echoes. Fear, anger, pride, they cling to the sword. They whisper in the steel. To quiet them, one must learn the weight of stillness." Jack approached the anvil, eyes drawn to the unfinished sword. The blade was smooth, without edge or reflection, shaped perfectly, yet incomplete. "Why do you not finish it?" Jack asked. "Because no one is ready to wield what cannot harm," the spirit replied. "A true quiet blade does not kill. It separates noise from truth." The words lingered in the air, wrapping around Jack's thoughts like smoke. He had fought countless battles, faced countless evils, yet none of those victories had ever brought peace. He bowed slightly. "Teach me." The spirit studied him for a moment. "You already carry the sword that ends darkness," he said softly. "But can you carry the one that ends yourself?" Jack felt his chest tighten. He looked down at his hands, steady, scarred, marked by time and struggle. "I have carried guilt," he said quietly, "and loss. Perhaps that is what you mean." The spirit gave no answer. Instead, he lifted the hammer and struck the unfinished sword once. The sound rang clear through the night, not harsh but pure, like a bell in an empty temple. The village lights flickered in the distance. The wind swept through the forest, bending the trees in a gentle wave. "Take this sound with you," the spirit said. "Every time you draw your blade, remember that silence is the truest form of power." Jack watched as the spirit began to fade, his form scattering like smoke into the air. Only the hammer remained, warm and still humming faintly with the sound of that final strike. Jack stood alone. The forge grew dim again, but something inside him had shifted. The night no longer felt cold. He left the forge and followed the narrow trail back toward the village. His sword hung quietly at his side, and for the first time, it felt lighter, as though it too had understood. When he reached the well again, the water reflected dawn's first hint of blue. The long night was ending. He sat once more, closing his eyes. He could still hear that sound, the clean note of the hammer, the whisper of the spirit's words, and beneath it all, the steady beat of his own heart. The quiet blade was not a weapon after all. It was a way of being. The sky turned a soft violet as dawn spread across the horizon. Mist clung to the rooftops, curling through the empty streets like breath from a sleeping giant. Jack rose slowly, his sandals brushing against the dew-soaked earth. The village remained silent. Yet something in that silence had changed. It no longer felt hollow, it felt waiting. As Jack walked, the faint glimmer of sunlight touched every window, revealing small traces of life. A cup half filled with tea, long cold. A child's toy left on the steps. Footprints leading toward the edge of the rice fields, where the mist was thickest. He followed those footprints. The closer he came to the fields, the stronger the silence grew, not oppressive, but deep. like the hush inside a temple before a prayer. Birds moved through the sky but made no sound. The air trembled softly. At the far end of the path stood an ancient torii gate. Its red paint had faded to gray, but its presence was commanding, rising from the mist like a memory refusing to fade. Beyond it, a lone figure knelt before a small shrine. Jack approached quietly. "Forgive me," he said, gently bowing. "I did not mean to disturb your peace." The figure turned. It was an old woman, her back curved like a willow branch, her hair white as snow. She studied him with eyes that seemed older than the land itself. "You have not disturbed it," she said softly. "You have joined it." Jack lowered his head respectfully. "I seek to understand this village. Why is it so still? Where are your people?" The woman smiled faintly, though sadness lingered at the edge of her lips. "They are here," she whispered, pressing her hand to her chest. "Each one found their silence as you have." "I do not understand," Jack said. She reached out and brushed a thin layer of dust from the shrine. Beneath it was a polished stone, smooth and unbroken, glowing faintly with the morning light. "This village once thrived on the noise of war," she said. "They forged weapons, trained soldiers, and sent sons to die in battles far from home. When peace returned, they no longer knew how to live in quiet. Their hearts still rang with echoes of conflict, so they sought to silence them." Jack listened, his face solemn. "The spirit of the forge came," she continued, "and promised them rest. He taught them how to listen, how to hear the wind, the water, the heartbeat beneath the ground. One by one they faded into that silence, not as death, but as release." Jack's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the mist began to thin. "And you remain," he said quietly. "I stay until the last sound leaves this place," she replied. The sound of a traveler's footsteps. Jack felt the weight of her words. "Then I should leave quietly," he said, bowing deeply. But before he could turn away, the old woman placed a hand upon his arm. Her touch was light, trembling but firm. "You carry much noise within you, warrior. Regret, grief, they echo even when you do not speak. Let them rest here a while." Jack closed his eyes. For a moment he allowed the stillness to wash over him, the cool air, the faint scent of wet earth, the silence that wasn't empty but full. He breathed in deeply, then exhaled, slow and steady. When he opened his eyes, the old woman was gone. Only the torii gate remained, and beneath it, a single white feather rested where she had knelt. He picked it up, holding it carefully. It was weightless, like the feeling in his chest now. The first light of morning bathed the village in gold. The houses shimmered faintly, their outlines soft, as if the whole place were caught between two worlds. Jack understood then that some silences are not absence, but completion. He bowed to the village, to its people unseen but present, and to the spirit who had shown him the truth. Then he turned toward the path, leading out his sword silent, the feather tucked gently into his belt. Behind him, the forge, the shrine, the houses all faded slowly into the mist, returning to the stillness from which they came. Jack walked the long road beyond the fields, the mist thinning behind him. The world was awakening, birds calling, streams flowing, yet every sound felt softer now, gentler, as if the land itself whispered instead of spoke. He reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The horizon burned with morning light, touching the edge of his blade. For the first time, he did not hear the steel's faint hum of readiness. It was still utterly quiet. He drew it once more, not to fight, but to see. The reflection in the blade no longer showed a warrior, only a man, calm and alive. He smiled faintly. "The quiet blade," he murmured, sliding it back into its sheath. The wind passed through the grass, carrying with it the lingering calm of the silent village. Jack stood for a moment longer, then continued his walk into the endless lands ahead, his heart at peace, his path silent as dawn. And so the journey continued. The sun rose high, pale and distant, over a land of endless sand. The road that once curved through green valleys had vanished beneath dunes of gold. Jack walked slowly, his straw hat tilted low, his robe rippling with each breath of the desert wind. For days he had journeyed alone, following the quiet path beyond the silent village. His sword remained still by his side, not once drawn. The silence he carried, once a comfort, now pressed against him like heat. There was no bird song, no rustle of trees. Only the whisper of wind across sand, repeating itself endlessly. Each step left a faint mark that vanished moments later. It was as if the earth refused to remember him. By noon, the light became blinding. Mirage-like shapes shimmered at the horizon, a flicker of movement, perhaps, or a shadow that vanished when he looked directly at it. His throat ached with thirst. Then came the first sound, faint, distant, almost imagined. It was not wind, not sand, but something between. A low hum, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the desert floor. Jack stopped, listening. The hum grew louder, vibrating through his sandals, up his legs, into his chest. He knelt, pressing his palm to the ground. The sand was trembling. Suddenly, the earth gave a soft sigh, and from beneath it, a voice rose, not one, but many, layered and broken, like echoes trapped in stone. "You carry our silence," it whispered. "But do you carry our pain?" Jack's eyes opened wide. The sand before him shifted, forming faint outlines of faces flickering, vanishing, reforming. He stood slowly. "I seek no harm," he said, his voice calm. "Only peace." The wind swirled violently. "Peace without memory is emptiness," the voices cried. "You have forgotten the weight of sound." The ground beneath him rippled, and in an instant the desert changed. The golden dunes grew dark, turning to ash. The sky dimmed. From the sand rose shapes, faint silhouettes of warriors, each holding a blade of light. Their faces were hidden behind shadow, but their eyes burned with pale fire. Jack drew his sword, instinct guiding his hand, but when he lifted it, there was no hum, no sharpness, only stillness. The figures encircled him, their forms flickering like ghosts. They did not attack, they simply stood, watching, waiting. Jack lowered his weapon. "If you are here to test me," he said, "then I will listen." The wind fell silent again. The air thickened until even his heartbeat felt too loud. Then one of the warriors stepped forward, its voice neither male nor female, but echoing from every direction. "We are the echoes of those who fought before you," it said. "Our blades sang until the world forgot their song. You have silenced your sword, but silence is not peace. It is denial." Jack's hand trembled slightly on his hilt. "I seek understanding," he answered quietly. "Not denial." "Then understand this," the figure whispered, lifting his blade. "Even the quietest heart can still bleed." The ash shifted. The figures vanished into wind again, leaving behind only the humming sound, louder now, surrounding him from all sides. Jack looked around. The desert was gone. He stood on an endless plain of black glass, and within its surface he saw reflections, not of the sky, but of his past. Battles, faces, enemies he had defeated, friends he had lost. Each reflection moved, speaking in his own voice words of anger, fear, doubt. He closed his eyes. These are not real, he thought. Only echoes. But the echoes did not fade. They grew clearer, surrounding him. becoming louder until silence itself turned unbearable. The reflections rippled across the black glass, forming shapes that stepped forward until one stood before him clear, solid, and alive. It was himself. Younger, sharper, eyes burning with fury. The Jack that once fought with endless resolve, who believed every silence must be broken by the swing of a sword. The two stared at one another in stillness. "You've changed," the younger Jack said, his voice edged with disbelief. "You hesitate. You've grown soft." Jack said nothing. The air between them shimmered like heat. "You were a warrior," the reflection continued, pacing in a circle around him. "You vowed to destroy AKU, to end the darkness. And now, you seek peace in empty villages and listen to ghosts." Jack kept his gaze calm, his voice quiet. "The war within is darker than any I fought outside." The younger Jack drew his sword, identical in every detail. "You've forgotten what drives you." "I remember," the older Jack replied. "But memory is not meant to chain us." Their eyes locked, two sides of one soul caught between purpose and peace. Without warning, the younger one struck. The clash of steel rang out like thunder, the first true sound the desert had known. Sparks flew. The ground beneath them cracked, each strike echoing infinitely into the emptiness. Jack defended smoothly, each motion precise, controlled. But his reflection fought with raw rage, every swing cutting through the air with the sound of vengeance. "You fight to end yourself," the younger one roared. "You run from the noise of your past, because it reminds you of failure." Jack's blade caught his opponent's, locking them together. Their faces were inches apart. "Perhaps," he whispered. "But peace does not mean forgetting, it means forgiving." The younger version faltered for a heartbeat, his grip trembling. Jack took that moment to step back. His sword lowered. His eyes softened. "I forgive you," he said simply. The words echoed not as sound, but as a feeling that spread through the air like warmth. The younger Jack's blade fell to the glass with a dull chime. His form began to fade, dissolving into faint streams of light that drifted upward and vanished. When the last shimmer disappeared, the desert reformed. The black glass turned back to sand. The sky lightened, and a gentle breeze brushed against Jack's robe. He sank to one knee, breathing deeply. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was open, patient, alive. Above him, the faint hum he had heard earlier changed tone. It was softer now, carrying rhythm, almost like a song carried by the wind. He looked up. Across the dunes, a single structure stood half-buried, glowing faintly in the morning haze. A temple. Jack rose and began walking toward it. The sand shifted beneath his feet, carrying him as though it too wanted him to reach it. As he drew closer, he saw stone carvings on the temple walls, ancient warriors kneeling, their blades placed before them. Not in battle, but in surrender. In the center, an engraving of a sword floating above still water. Jack traced the image with his fingers. "The blade that finds peace," he murmured. Inside the temple, the air was cool and thick with the scent of incense long burned away. The walls were lined with mirrors that reflected nothing. At the far end stood an altar, and upon it lay a single bell made of dull silver. He approached slowly. The bell seemed ordinary, yet its silence filled the room completely. Jack bowed. "I understand now," he whispered. "To silence the blade, one must silence the self." He lifted the bell gently and struck it once. No sound came. Yet outside, the desert stirred dunes shifting like waves, the sky deepening with color. The quiet was alive again, humming softly with energy unseen. Jack closed his eyes and breathed in. The silence now was not empty, but sacred. The moment Jack struck the silent bell, the world shifted again, not violently, but gently, like a breath being drawn after long stillness. The air rippled. The sand outside began to move in slow spirals, creating patterns too perfect to be random. Jack stepped out of the temple and found the desert alive with motion. The dunes swayed as though the wind itself had learned rhythm. Every grain of sand shimmered faintly with light, and as they moved, they whispered not in words but in feelings. Peace, memory, balance. He stood at the threshold, listening. Each whisper felt familiar, a fragment of voices from his past. The monks who had trained him, his father's wisdom, the laughter of the villagers he had once saved, all woven together, carried by the air. And then, within that chorus, came one voice, distinct, the spirit of the blacksmith. "You have tempered silence," it said softly. "But peace is a blade that must never dull." Jack looked down at his sword. Its surface glowed faintly, reflecting not the light of the sun, but the rhythm of his breath. He unsheathed it slowly. The sound of metal sliding from wood was almost musical, not sharp, not cold, but serene. He gazed at the blade, and for a moment it seemed transparent. He could see through it, through his own reflection, to the desert beyond. Then the wind rose suddenly, carrying with it a deep tone like the ring of distant thunder. The dunes ahead began to shift, forming a shape, a great figure rising from the sand. Its body was sculpted from the earth, its eyes glowing white, its form shifting between man and storm. "Who dares awaken the desert of echoes?" the figure's voice boomed, though it was not angry, more curious than wrathful. Jack bowed respectfully. "I am but a traveler seeking understanding." The figure regarded him for a long moment. "Many have come seeking answers," it said. "Most bring questions loud enough to drown them. But you carry quiet." Jack nodded once. "Silence is what remains when truth speaks." The figure tilted its head as if smiling. "And yet even truth must be tested." It raised an arm, and the sky dimmed again. The winds howled. The shifting dunes took shape once more, not as warriors, but as moments, memories. The faces of those Jack had failed to save appeared within the storm, each calling his name. He closed his eyes, letting the sand whip around him, sting his skin, fill the air with 1,000 forgotten cries. "I know your names," he whispered, "and I carry your silence." The storm slowed. The giant form leaned closer, studying him. "Do you grieve?" it asked. "Yeah," Jack replied softly. "But I do not let grief guide my blade." "Then what does?" He looked up at the endless sky. Stillness. The figure's vast body began to fade back into sand. "Then you are ready to walk the final silence," it said. Its voice now distant, fading like wind through hollow stone. When it vanished, the desert fell completely still. Not a grain moved, not a sound existed. Jack stood alone, his sword glowing faintly, the bell's unseen echo still vibrating within him. He took a slow breath. The final silence, he thought. What lies beyond that? He turned to the horizon. There, far in the distance, he saw what looked like the outline of water, impossible in a place such as this. A lake, perfectly still, reflecting the clouds above. The wind began to move again, urging him forward. Jack started toward the mirage, unsure if it was real or if perhaps it was the final truth he was meant to find. The sand beneath his feet began to soften, shifting from warm to cool. Each step carried the faint memory of sound like footsteps across the water, and as he walked, the world seemed to fade once more, the dunes giving way to endless light. The desert opened into a vast plain of silver light. Jack slowed his steps as the mirage ahead began to take form. What he had thought to be water was real, an immense, still lake, its surface smoother than glass, reflecting the sky with impossible clarity. He approached the edge and looked down. His reflection gazed back at him, serene and silent. The wind had stopped entirely. There was no sound, not even the faint hum that had followed him since the forge. For a moment he wondered if the world itself had stopped breathing. Jack knelt beside the water. He reached out, letting his fingers touch its surface. The ripples spread outward in perfect circles, vanishing before they could return. He waited, expecting an echo, a voice, a memory, a vision. But nothing came, only stillness. "This is it," he murmured. The final silence. He looked deeper into the reflection. Beneath the surface, faint shapes began to appear, not of himself, but of countless blades resting at the bottom of the lake. Swords, spears, daggers, weapons laid to rest, untouched for ages. Jack's breath caught. Each one glimmered faintly in the light, as though holding the last heartbeat of the warriors who had once wielded them. He realized then that this was no ordinary lake. It was a resting place, a graveyard of war. "The silence of every battle ends here," a voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. Jack looked up. Across the lake stood a figure cloaked in white, featureless but human in shape. It moved without disturbing the water, gliding toward him until it stood an arm's length away. "Who are you?" Jack asked. The figure's voice was gentle, almost kind. "I am the echo of every blade that was ever quieted," it said. "The stillness after every final strike." Jack bowed his head. "Then this is where I must lay mine." The figure inclined slightly, as if in agreement. "If you wish to end your noise, yes, but peace cannot live where purpose dies." Jack thought for a moment, then drew his sword. Its glow had faded. "My purpose has always been clear," he said, "but the noise it brings has never left me." He lowered the blade to the water, the tip barely touching the surface. Rings of silver light spread outward, reflecting into infinity. The figure reached out its hand, touching the sword gently. "Then listen closely," it whispered. The air shimmered. The lake began to vibrate, its stillness transforming into sound, not loud, but infinite. Every ripple sang softly, a tone so pure it felt like the heart of silence itself. The figure's form flickered. Its voice carried within the tone. "The quiet blade does not sleep, it listens. It becomes the space between sound and stillness." Jack's heart beat slow and steady. He closed his eyes. He could hear everything, the whisper of wind far away, the heartbeat beneath the sand, the faint song of water touching air. When he opened his eyes again, the figure was gone. Only his reflection remained calm, older, whole. Jack rose slowly. The sword remained in his hand, yet something had changed. The steel no longer shone. Instead, it reflected the world perfectly, without distortion. It had become clear, transparent, like the surface of the lake. He sheathed it carefully, the motion silent, but full of meaning. Then he bowed to the lake, to the unseen spirits who had watched over him, and to the echo that had guided him this far. As he turned to leave, a single drop of water rose from the lake, floating through the air until it landed gently on his sleeve. It glimmered like a star for an instant before vanishing. The path behind him dissolved into mist, but ahead, far beyond the horizon, a faint glow appeared. A forest. The next journey had already begun. As Jack walked from the lake, the sands beneath his feet began to glow faintly, as if lit from within. The desert no longer felt empty. It pulsed with quiet life. The wind hummed in low harmony, carrying the tones of his footsteps across the horizon. The silence he once feared was no longer still. It was music now, the soft rhythm of existence. He stopped once to look back. The lake had vanished, leaving only smooth desert and the faint shimmer of light in the air, like the last breath of a dream. Jack placed the hand on the hilt of his sword. It no longer felt like a weapon, it was a reminder, a promise to move through the world without breaking its peace. "The quiet blade," he whispered again, smiling faintly. And with that he turned toward the distant glow of green, the whisper of trees calling him forward, and continued his walk, step by step, carrying the silence of the desert in his heart. The trees rose tall and endless, their canopies whispering like old friends in conversation. Jack stepped beneath the green shadows, leaving the desert's gold silence behind. Every step softened his thoughts, like ripples fading across still water. The forest was not quiet, not in the way the desert had been. It was alive with tiny sounds, the sigh of branches, the distant drip of dew, the hum of hidden life. Yet somehow it all blended into a stillness that felt kind. Jack walked slowly, his sandals brushing against moss that glowed faintly in the half-light. Shafts of sunlight slipped through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on his face. He breathed deeply, sensing something familiar, the scent of memory. He had walked through the countless forests in his travels, some haunted, some cursed, others alive with danger. But this one was different. It did not test him. It welcomed him. Then he heard it a faint echo. At first, he thought it was his own footsteps bouncing off the trees. But as he listened, the sound seemed to follow him a beat behind, like a reflection in sound. When he stopped, it stopped. When he moved again, so did it. He turned slowly, hand resting near his sword, though not to draw it. The forest rustled, the air trembling gently as if holding its breath. Then from between the trees came a small flicker of light. It danced, soft and golden, hovering above the moss like a living ember. Jack tilted his head. It wasn't fire, it was sound shaped into light, a glowing echo. He watched as it pulsed once, twice, then drifted closer, shimmering with faint whispers, fragments of laughter, a lullaby, something ancient and human. He reached out his hand, and the echo circled his fingers, its warmth gentle as a heartbeat. For a moment he closed his eyes, and he saw faces, not clearly, but like ripples in a pond. Fleeting, kind faces of villagers, of travelers long gone. Their voices brushed against his mind, not speaking words, but feelings, gratitude, peace. The echo dimmed, then drifted ahead of him, lighting the way. Jack followed without question. There was no fear here, only wonder. The deeper he went, the stronger the feeling became that the forest itself remembered him. The trees seemed to hum softly as he passed, and when he touched one of their trunks, he felt warmth beneath the bark, like a slow, steady pulse. He whispered, almost to himself, "The silence, it carries voices." And as if answering, the air filled with a gentle tone, a sound like a bell struck far away, yet soft enough to make the heart ache. The tone lingered, weaving between the trees like a ribbon of sound. Jack stood still, eyes half closed, letting it wash over him. It wasn't just a single tone anymore. Faint layers joined in, soft as breath, rising and falling like waves. It reminded him of temple bells from his youth, of monks greeting the dawn with gentle prayers that carried across the mountains. The forest around him shimmered faintly with every note. The air trembled, and not from power, but from feeling. Jack lowered his head, pressing one palm to the ground. The earth hummed beneath his hand, slow, rhythmic, alive. The forest remembers," he murmured. As he rose, a shape appeared ahead, an old wooden bridge crossing a stream. The bridge was cracked and half covered in moss, yet the water beneath it glowed faintly blue, reflecting streaks of moonlight, even though the sun still filtered through the leaves. He stepped onto the planks carefully, each creak echoing softly, answered by another sound, a second echo, almost like his own steps, but younger, lighter. When he reached the middle of the bridge, the air shimmered. Across from him stood himself. Not the warrior he was now, but a memory, a young Jack in his white robe, eyes wide with hope. The illusion looked at him with a quiet wonder. Jack did not speak. He only bowed. The younger reflection bowed in return, then faded into the soft glow of the forest. He lingered there for a while, staring at the rippling water. It carried reflections of the trees, the sky, and fragments of sound, laughter, whispers, lullabies. The longer he listened, the more he realized they were not random. They were echoes of kindness, of lives touched, of peace restored, of moments where his presence had brought calm. Each note was a life he had changed without realizing. Jack closed his eyes and whispered, "So, this is what silence holds." When he opened them again, something new appeared at the edge of the stream, a small creature, no taller than his knee, with fur like mist and eyes glowing pale green. It tilted its head, curious but unafraid. Jack knelt. "Do you live here, little one?" The creature blinked, then made a faint chiming sound. Not speech, but understanding. It stepped closer, touched its paw to his sandal, and the sound of chimes deepened into a warm hum. Then slowly, it began to walk, glancing back as if asking him to follow. He did. The creature led him through the forest, past glowing roots and pools of light that mirrored the stars above. Every so often, the echoes would flicker again, tiny bursts of memory, of emotion. A mother singing to a child, a monk offering tea, the laughter of children running through temple courtyards. Each sound was an echo of kindness, floating freely through the world, landing wherever it found quiet hearts to rest in. The creature stopped suddenly and turned. Before them was a great tree, ancient, enormous, its trunk spiraling high above, branches glowing with soft gold light. At its base, water trickled into a pool, so clear that it seemed invisible. Jack stepped closer, reverent. "The heart of the forest," he whispered. The creature nodded once, then leapt onto a root and vanished into the light. Jack kneeled before the tree. The silence deepened, not empty, but sacred. The kind that feels like being held by something far larger than yourself. He placed his hands together and closed his eyes. The silence around the great tree was vast, the kind of silence that felt endless, like the space between stars. Jack could feel it surrounding him, pressing gently against his skin, filling the air like breath. He did not move for a long while. He simply sat beneath the ancient branches, his sword resting across his knees, his thoughts fading one by one until only quiet remained. Then, from within that stillness, a voice began to rise, not from a person, but from the forest itself. It was not a human voice. It was the resonance of wood and wind, the hum of roots beneath the soil, the sigh of the stream. It carried no words, and yet Jack understood it. The forest was thanking him. He did not answer aloud. He simply bowed his head, his heart soft with humility. The light from the great tree shifted, rippling across the moss like the glow of dawn. Each leaf above shimmered, sending tiny sparks of golden dust into the air. They drifted down slowly, swirling around Jack until he was surrounded by the gentle rain of light. When the particles touched his robes, they dissolved into warmth, not heat, but peace. He breathed deeply, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. The echoes he'd heard earlier, laughter, whispers, soft songs returned faintly in the distance, circling him like invisible companions. He realized then that the forest was made of memory. Every creature that had once lived here, every gentle soul that had passed through, had left behind an imprint, not of their form, but of their peace. And that peace had grown roots, bloomed, become the forest itself. Jack's eyes opened slowly. Even silence remembers kindness, he said softly. At that, the pool before him began to ripple. The reflection on its surface shifted, not showing his face, but scenes from his journey. The villagers he'd saved, the people he'd guided, the friends he'd left behind. Their faces appeared in the water, smiling, calm. They did not speak. They did not need to. He smiled faintly back at them. Then, from the base of the great tree, a glow began to spread. The light grew brighter, taking shape until a small, translucent figure appeared, no taller than a child. Its form shimmered, like the echo of a spirit. When it spoke, its voice was soft and layered, as though 1,000 whispers were speaking at once. "You carry peace in your silence, traveler," it said. "But do you know why?" Jack bowed deeply. "I have only learned to listen." The spirit smiled a quiet curve of light. "Then you have already learned what many cannot." It drifted closer, its glow brushing against Jack's sword. "The blade you carry," it said, "is not just forged from steel. It is shaped by every act of stillness. Every moment you have chosen mercy over wrath. That is why it hums. It remembers the silence within you." Jack looked down at the sword resting in his hands. He could feel it faintly vibrating, not with power, but with life. The spirit reached out, touching the air above the blade. "When you next draw this weapon," it said, "do not seek to strike. Seek only to restore the silence." With that, the spirit's form dissolved, scattering into 1,000 motes of light that drifted upward, blending into the canopy until they were gone. Jack sat there for a long time, the echo of its words resting in his heart. The quiet stretched endlessly, soft as sleep. When he finally rose, the air around him felt different, cleaner, calmer. He bowed to the great tree, to the unseen spirits, to the peace they had given him. Then he turned toward the forest path once more. The moss glowed faintly beneath his feet, lighting his way forward. He walked slowly, unhurried, as though the forest's rhythm had become his own. Every step was measured, soundless, perfectly in tune with the heartbeat of the land. The forest path wound downward now, tracing the edge of a river that shimmered like glass. Fireflies drifted lazily above it, pulsing with pale light. Jack followed their gentle rhythm, the cool air brushing his face. Everything around him felt alive, yet untouched, a world existing in harmony with itself. At times he could hear faint laughter through the trees, not from people, but from the forest itself, as though the echoes of joy had become part of its breath. He smiled faintly, remembering the laughter of children he had once saved, the grateful tears of families reunited, the quiet nods of old monks who had taught him stillness long ago. The memories came not as images, but as sensations, warmth, kindness, peace. As he walked, he noticed that the trees began to change. Their trunks grew thinner, their bark lighter, their leaves turning silver under the dimming sky. The air itself began to glow with a bluish hue, and the sound of the river softened until it was almost silent. Jack stopped and looked up. The moon had risen, vast, silver, casting a glow that turned the forest into a dream. Beneath it, the path split into two. One led deeper into the light, the other toward the edge of shadow. He stood there quietly, his mind as calm as the water beside him. In his heart, he already knew which path to take, not by reason, but by intuition. He followed the one leading toward the shadow. As he walked, the world around him began to fade into mist. The trees became outlines, their edges dissolving like smoke. The silence thickened, dense and soft, until even the sound of his own footsteps disappeared. For a moment he wondered if he had crossed into a dream. Then through the haze a faint glimmer appeared, a single floating lantern drifting slowly in the air. It was old, its paper faded and torn, but its light burned steady and warm. Jack reached out and caught it gently. As his hand closed around it, he felt something, the pulse of memory again. A distant night long ago when he was a child, a festival in his homeland. Lanterns released into the sky to honor those who had passed. He remembered his mother's gentle smile, his father's proud gaze, and the promise he had made to protect the world from darkness. He held the lantern close to his chest and closed his eyes. The ache of years spent alone flickered through him like a quiet breeze. But within it, there was no sorrow, only gratitude. For every hardship, every step had brought him here. When he opened his eyes, the mist around him had begun to clear. The trees returned, shimmering faintly as though made of moonlight. The forest had shifted again and no longer felt like a place outside of time, but a reflection of his spirit. He realized then that the forest wasn't merely showing him memories, it was returning them to him. The fragments he had left behind through endless battles, lonely travels, and silent nights, all of them were being gathered here, woven back into his heart. He breathed slowly, deeply. The lantern's light dimmed, then dissolved into his hands like fine dust. The warmth stayed. From somewhere behind him came the soft sound of a bell and single, clear note that hung in the air long after it faded. It was the forest's farewell. Jack turned back to look one last time. The trees swayed gently, and in the shadows between them, he thought he saw shapes, faint outlines of the villagers he had met, the friends he had lost, all smiling. He bowed deeply. "Thank you," he whispered. The wind passed through the branches, and for an instant, the forest itself seemed to bow back. Jack straightened, his eyes calm, his steps light. He began to walk again, the forest parting before him as the path opened into a clearing where moonlight pooled like water. The air shimmered with silver mist. Ahead lay the final path where silence would be tested one last time. The clearing was vast and open beneath the moon. Jack stood at its center, the air so still it felt like time itself was listening. His reflection shimmered faintly on the surface of the mist, pale and quiet, like a memory that refused to fade. He drew his sword slowly. The blade sang not a sharp sound, but a soft hum that carried the breath of the forest within it. The same silence he had nurtured was now within the steel. He held it upright, eyes closed. "May this silence protect," he whispered, "not destroy." The forest seemed to glow brighter as if in agreement. A breeze stirred, lifting his robe, scattering silver leaves through the air. They spiraled around him, forming a slow, graceful dance before vanishing into light. Jack sheathed the sword, turned once toward the forest, and smiled. The piece he carried now was different, not fragile, but enduring. As he walked onward, the moon followed him across the sky, its reflection fading slowly behind the trees. The echoes grew quiet once more, leaving only the faint rhythm of his footsteps, the gentle sound of a traveler who had found harmony in silence. Dawn touched the horizon with a faint blush of gold. The forest faded behind Jack as he stepped into the open plains, rolling fields bathed in morning mist. The air was cool, filled with the scent of dew and wild grass. Each step he took left a faint shimmer on the ground, the last trace of the forest blessing. He walked for hours without speaking, without thought. There was no need. His silence was full now, not empty, not lonely. It felt alive, as though the world around him breathed in rhythm with his own heart. Birds began to sing as the sun rose higher. Their melodies were soft, almost uncertain at first, then swelling into a chorus that carried across the fields. Jack smiled faintly. For the first time in what felt like centuries, he allowed himself to simply listen. He found a hill and sat beneath a lone tree. Its leaves shimmered in the light breeze, making a soft, rustling sound that reminded him of distant temples. His sword rested beside him, reflecting the dawn. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, the slow rhythm of someone who no longer searched, but had found. Then, far in the distance, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was faint but sharp, the clash of steel. Another echoed it, then another. It was the unmistakable rhythm of battle. Jack rose, picking up his sword. The serenity of the morning wavered slightly, like a ripple across still water. He hesitated for a moment. Part of him wanted to turn away, to preserve the quiet he had found. But the silence within him spoke clearly. True stillness was not escape. It was compassion. He began to walk toward the sound. Through the haze he found a small village surrounded by the fields. Smoke curled upward from the rooftops, and frightened villagers huddled near the gates. A group of mechanical bandits, crude constructs powered by whirring gears and flickering red lights, were tearing through the market, their metal limbs slicing through stalls and scattering food and pottery. Jack approached silently. The villagers didn't see him at first, only the faint figure moving through the morning mist. The bandits turned, their sensors flashing. One raised its blade arm and charged, letting out a mechanical shriek. Jack's hand moved in one calm, fluid motion. The sword left its sheath without sound. There was no cry, no anger, only stillness. The metal construct froze mid-strike, its body sliced cleanly in half. The sound it made as it fell was soft, almost like wind chimes. The other bandits paused. They advanced together, clanking and screeching, blades glinting in the sunlight. Jack moved through them like water smooth, flowing, unbroken. Every strike he made was silent, precise. No sound of rage or fury followed, only the whisper of wind against steel. Within minutes, the plain was still again. The fallen machines glimmered faintly into the grass, smoke curling to the sky. Jack stood among them, his robe untouched, his sword steady in his hand. He sheathed it slowly. The villagers began to emerge, their faces pale but filled with relief. One old man approached and bowed deeply. "You have saved us, traveler. How can we ever repay such a warrior?" Jack shook his head gently. "I am no warrior," he said softly. "Only a keeper of quiet." The old man looked puzzled. "Quiet?" Jack glanced toward the horizon. "Yes, the kind that brings peace, not fear." The villagers didn't fully understand, but they felt it, the calm in his voice, the serenity that lingered even after battle. The air itself seemed to settle. The villagers slowly returned to their homes, still glancing back at the quiet figure beneath the tree. Children peeked from doorways, whispering to each other in awe. Jack knelt beside the fragments of the fallen machines. He touched one gently, a twisted gear, still faintly humming. Even in its brokenness, it carried motion, sound, a kind of desperate rhythm. He looked up at the sky. "Even metal seeks purpose," he murmured. The old man who had followed him asked softly, "Will they return?" Jack shook his head. "No, not these ones." His gaze lingered on the faint smoke that drifted toward the clouds. "But others will. Conflict never truly ends." The old man frowned, confused. "Then why do you not stay to protect us? You are strong, master." Jack's eyes softened. "Strength alone does not protect," he said. "Peace does." He rose slowly, sheathing his sword once more. I will mend what I can before I go. For the rest of the morning, Jack helped the villagers rebuild quiet, steady work. He lifted beams, gathered broken pottery, tied ropes, cleared the debris the machines had left behind. The people watched him with quiet gratitude. Every movement he made was deliberate, graceful. He did not command or boast, he simply worked beside them, speaking only when needed. By midday, the market stood whole again. The villagers gathered to thank him, offering food, water, and blessings. But Jack declined gently. Keep what you have, he said. Let it nourish those who remain. A young boy tugged at his robe. Mister, why didn't you shout when you were fighting? My father says warriors always yell. Jack smiled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. Because anger makes noise, he said softly. Peace listens. The boy tilted his head, trying to understand. So, your sword listens too? Jack paused, looking down at the blade resting in its sheath. The faint hum was there again, not of metal, but of harmony. Yes, he said finally. It listens to the silence between things. The boy nodded solemnly as though accepting a secret. Then he ran off to tell the others. Jack looked around the small village. The smoke had cleared, the air returning to its calm rhythm. The sounds of laughter began to rise, hesitant at first, then fuller, brighter. The clatter of pots, the chirping of birds, the wind through the fields, life resuming. He smiled faintly. For a brief moment, he thought of the silent village, the one where his journey had begun. The parallels were not lost on him. It seemed the world had a way of reminding him that peace was never a destination, only a moment to be carried forward. As the sun began to dip low, painting the horizon with orange and crimson light, Jack stood at the village gate. The old man approached once more. You are leaving, aren't you? Jack nodded. Yes, my road does not end here. The man sighed. We will pray for your safety, wanderer. Pray instead for peace, Jack said with a small smile. The man bowed deeply. Then that we shall. Jack turned toward the open plain. The golden light of sunset stretched long shadows before him. His robe fluttered softly in the wind. The faint clink of his sandals against stone was the only sound as he walked away. Behind him, the village quieted once more, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. The silence left behind felt warm. It was the silence of safety. Jack continued walking until the last rooftops disappeared from sight. The fields stretched endlessly before him, glowing like molten gold in the setting sun. He followed the path until it led him to the edge of a small lake, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the sky above. He sat at its edge, resting his sword beside him. The world was still, he whispered. And so, the silence returns. The sky above turned to velvet blue. The sun had slipped beyond the hills, leaving behind only a faint orange trail fading into twilight. Jack watched it in silence. The reflection in the lake rippled softly, the surface alive with quiet motion. He remembered the desert's hum, the forest's echo, the whisper of the great tree. Each place had given him something unseen, not knowledge, but presence. A reminder that even in solitude he was never truly alone. A breeze moved across the water, lifting strands of his hair. The scent of night flowers drifted by, sweet and faint. He let the stillness fill him once more. In the reflection of the lake, the stars began to appear one by one, glimmering faintly like watchful eyes. Their light touched the edge of his sword, and for a moment it gleamed softly, like moonlight caught in steel. He reached for it, running a finger along its blade. The sword hummed faintly. Not as before, but lower, steadier. It was as if it breathed with him. Jack whispered, "Even steel finds peace when the hand that wields it no longer seeks war." He smiled faintly. Then from somewhere across the lake, he heard a sound, soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The ripples grew stronger, the reflection trembling. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he saw it. A single lotus flower drifting toward him. Its petals glowed faintly white, like moonlight turned into bloom. He leaned forward as it reached the shore. The flower stopped right before his knee, resting against the rock. When he touched it, warmth spread through his fingertips, a gentle reminder of the life flowing through everything. He lifted it carefully, setting it to float again. The current carried it away slowly, gliding back into the open lake until it vanished in the reflection of the stars. Jack stood and bowed deeply to the water. "The world has no voice," he said quietly. "Yet it teaches those who listen." The night deepened, the air growing cool. Crickets began to sing, their rhythm slow and patient. In the distance, fireflies flickered between the reeds like wandering souls. He looked toward the horizon, where a faint blue glow shimmered the faint outline of mountains. He knew not what awaited beyond them. Perhaps another battle, perhaps another moment of peace. But he no longer searched for either. He simply walked where the silence guided him. Jack began to move again, his sandals brushing against the soft earth. Each step was light, unhurried. The moon hung above him like a guardian, its pale glow spilling silver across the path. He passed a grove of tall bamboo, their stalks swaying in the wind. They whispered against each other, creating a soft, endless song that seemed to echo what lived within him. He stopped to listen, closing his eyes. In their music, he heard it the voices of his teachers, the laughter of his childhood. The silence of battle survived, the gratitude of souls freed from darkness. All of them existed together now, forming one sound, not loud, not proud, but infinite. He whispered, "So this is peace." The bamboo swayed once more, as if bowing in answer. Jack continued walking, his figure bathed in moonlight, a lone silhouette, moving through the vast quiet of night. The wind moved around him gently, as though guiding his path forward. He did not look back, he no longer needed to. Far above, the stars shimmered brighter, scattered like petals across the dark sky. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled once soft, far away, and the sound lingered just long enough to feel like a farewell. Jack stopped for a moment, smiling. He knew that bell. The world was still teaching him, and he was still listening. The forest opened into a field of silver grass that shimmered under the moon. Each blade swayed gently, creating a soft, rustling chorus that felt like breathing the earth itself, exhaling. Jack stood at the edge, his shadow stretching long and thin across the open ground. He could feel the pull of memory in every gust of wind. Each place he had traveled returned to him like fragments of an old dream, the village's laughter, the storm's fury, the silence of the lake, the warmth of the fire that once guided him. Yet this place felt different. It wasn't the end of a road. It was the pause after a final note. As he stepped forward, his sandals brushed through the grass, leaving faint paths behind. The air smelled of dew and faint smoke. Someone somewhere was tending a fire. He followed that scent until he saw it. A small camp ahead, lit by the orange glow of embers. No one sat there. Only a half-burned log and a pot of untouched tea. Jack approached quietly, crouching beside it. The fire was nearly gone, its light weak but alive. He added a few twigs, and soon the flames rose again, dancing softly, painting gold across his face. He poured the tea and waited. The steam rose like mist, twisting upward before fading into the air. He took a small sip, The taste was earthy, simple, the kind of tea meant to be shared. Jack looked at the cup, then placed it beside the fire. "For whoever waits," he murmured. He sat cross-legged, resting his sword beside him. The flames flickered, and he let his eyes drift toward the horizon. The mountains were faint now, hidden beneath clouds, but their presence was still felt steady and vast. Then from across the wind a faint sound came. A rhythm, footsteps, or perhaps only the shifting grass. Jack listened closely, but it faded just as quickly as it had come. The world was testing his stillness once again. He smiled. "You cannot trick silence," he said softly. Moments later he felt it not danger, but recognition, a warmth in his chest, a soft hum through the ground beneath him. He turned slowly. There, beyond the campfire's edge, stood a figure cloaked in white, their face hidden, but their presence calm. Jack did not reach for his sword. The figure bowed. "You have carried the weight of sound and silence," they said, voice gentle as the breeze. "What do you carry now?" Jack thought for a moment, looking at his reflection in the fire. "Nothing," he said finally. "Only peace." The figure nodded, stepping closer until the light reached their face, and for an instant, Jack saw something familiar, the outline of his old master. The same eyes that once watched him learn to strike without anger. "Then the blade has learned what the hand could not," the master whispered. The air shimmered faintly around them, and when Jack looked again, the figure was gone, only the night remained. Yet it did not feel empty. It felt complete. He closed his eyes, bowing his head once more. The fire crackled softly, the tea's steam rising in a lazy spiral. In that quiet moment, everything, his battles, his losses, his victories, melted into one simple truth. He did not need to fight to find purpose. The purpose had always been to understand. He whispered to the stars, "The quiet blade, I was never meant to cut. It was meant to listen." As the fire dimmed, the moon brightened. Its silver light poured over the field, over the camp, over the sleeping earth. The world was at rest. Jack lay down beside the fire, arms crossed beneath his head. He watched the stars until his vision blurred. His breathing slowed, steady and soft like the rhythm of waves against a distant shore. He felt no urge to move, no pull to wander, just the soft comfort of stillness wrapping around him. In the last moments before sleep, he thought he heard the faint ring of a bell, not from a temple, but from within his own heart. A note so pure and gentle it made the world fade into silence once more. When dawn came, it arrived gently. No fanfare, no cry of birds, only the quiet unveiling of light. The horizon shifted from silver to pale gold, touching the sleeping grass, painting the edges of the forest in soft warmth. Jack stirred. He sat up slowly, the fire long gone, replaced by a curl of smoke that rose and disappeared into the clear sky. The teacup remained where he left it, its surface reflecting the first light of morning. He picked it up, smiled faintly, and poured the last few drops onto the soil. "For all journeys that begin in silence," he whispered. He stood, slinging his sword across his back. But now, when the blade touched his shoulder, it felt lighter, as if it had learned to breathe alongside him. Jack looked toward the horizon, a soft wind brushing past his face. His robe fluttered gently, and with one final bow to the rising sun, he began to walk. No destination, no burden, only peace. And as the world brightened around him, the quiet followed, loyal, eternal, and kind. The quiet blade had spoken. And so, as the dawn found him once more, the warrior finally rested. No victory, no loss, only quiet understanding. In stillness, he discovered what strength truly means. The blade no longer cut through battle, but through silence. If you felt the calm of this journey, take a deep breath before you sleep, and carry that peace with you into your dreams. Thank you for watching The Sleep Hours. This was Samurai Jack, the Quiet Blade. Until next time, fellas, good night.